it's really difficult to define a portrait in really strict terms. It's not necessarily just a picture of a face. It can be a lot more nuanced than that. One of the things that I thought was really intriguing about this year's competition is that I felt like many of the works were trying to reveal people and lives that are often overlooked. I think that opportunity to see the world from other people's perspectives is what's really valuable about portraits in particular.
We are drought and flood, thunder and drench, downpour and light.
I really like this image and just the whole backstory. I can't believe they killed this image because I feel like it's such a powerful one.
Right. Makes you wonder what else was killed.
I was really struck by a particular piece titled Killed Negative, which was representing a photograph that had been eliminated from a WPA project to document people during the Dust Bowl. It was a really amazing portrait of this Black man and how his experience at that time was kind of erased from our consciousness by the decision to eliminate that photograph from this WPA project. Another one was a drawing of a man and his daughter, and he's a caretaker for his daughter who's disabled. And the image of him with his eyes closed, I thought, was incredibly compelling, depicting this person's strength and pain at the same time. One of the pieces that I really enjoyed was really tightly cropped on the face and didn't show the eyes at all. One of the things that made that work intriguing was the fact that you didn't see the eyes. And how did that change your perception of the person who was being depicted when you couldn't see his eyes? I think that portraiture is always about how people think of themselves and how they relate to the world. And it's bringing that personal connection. And I think that's just making it more interesting and more human.
I think portraits are a range of things. I think sometimes a portrait can be a very emotional space. And there is like a very interesting kind of conceptual link to portraiture in which that we're looking at an object that begins to define a person or define a family or a community. And I think that, that is the range that I'm looking for always within the simplicity of portraiture, but that you can actually expand upon that notion of portrait through medium and the way that the work begins to, quite frankly, just simply be made within the decisions the artist makes. A lot of people, when they sit for a portrait, they don't know what to do with their hands. And I think that there's a history of looking at the way that hands engage us visually in terms of even what a hand means, that a hand can hold, a hand is a working hand, a hand can be twisted through age over time. The hands are this incredibly expressive part of our bodies. So in this year's Outwin juried exhibition, we went through so many amazing pieces and we came down to this group. And, it's one of these things that's hard because you are curating. I mean, you kind of want everybody to be able to hang in the Smithsonian. But this year, the range of work and also the kind of social political climate that we've been living in, and then also not political work that you can just really look upon this masterfully made piece, whether it be a painting or a photograph or a drawing. It is, in some extent, a portrait in the time that we're living in. And I hope that you all see that in this chosen exhibition.
One of the things that was really interesting in this competition was to see the range of materials pushing against these so-called classical understandings of what a portrait could be. Portraiture changed over 100 years ago. The question is, has the public changed in terms of the way it appreciates that change? And why shouldn't it? Art is not stagnant. There was such a wide range of materials being explored by a number of the persons who had submitted to the competition. And that was really exciting to see. I love the use of color. The work is really strong. I've been impressed not just with the work, but also to how far and wide so many of the submissions came from. It was really great to see so many works coming from places, major art centers, disregarded. This competition is a really great snapshot on how committed and how vibrant the art communities are across the country. My only wish is that we could show it all.
To me, a portrait is a representation of an individual. The representation can take different forms: sculpture, photography, even music, something abstract. It doesn't have to resemble the individual, it just has to somehow evoke and represent the individual.
The next one is number 46, and it's untitled.
I'm a yes.
Yes.
This is gorgeous in person.
Yeah, it is. It's so beautiful.
Well, I think scale works in interesting ways. There's a wonderful photograph of a man, and the scale of him sitting in that space, the camera wasn't too close, i.e. intruding on him, and it wasn't too far away. It seemed just right, where you the camera allowed that person to exist in his own private world, and yet at the same time gave you a sense of it. Like you were there in the room with that person. You were not a voyeur. The portrait made out of marquetry by Alison Elizabeth Taylor was a really striking portrait to me. And it's really about this kind of historical moment where people have had to figure out how to survive during COVID pandemic. How does the barbershop survive? And I just felt everything about the work was powerful from the moment I saw it. I think what I really loved about this competition was the diversity of people who entered and the diversity of subjects that were in the works. In a moment of historical crisis, that was a pretty hopeful thing.
I think that a great portrait captures the humanity of the person, something specific about the individual. But in addition to that, it communicates with an audience that's outside of just its contemporaries. It was one of the darkest periods of the pandemic in New York. Like, we still had the lockdown, but people were starting to come outside. We started doing these long, epic walks around Brooklyn. And on one of them, we walked under the bridge and we saw Anthony. My daughter was like, "What is he doing?" And he had hung this mirror on chain link and was there cutting a woman's hair. And he told me that his salon had been shuttered and he had wanted to raise money for social justice causes. I found it so remarkable the way he was resourceful and he was resilient and he found a way to adapt and survive in a time that was really confusing, and he was kind of creating this beautiful thing. And so I just started sketching it as sort of like a way of coping with everything. And I knew I wanted to make a piece, but I knew that it was a subject that needed like a sort of grand scale and a lot of detail and commitment because his gesture had affected me so strongly. Marquetry Hybrid relies on The technique of putting thin wood veneers together to create an image and using the values and hues of the insides of different colored trees to work together. First, I have a base layer that is just this marquetry. And then once I sort of glue that down to a substrate, sand it, put it through this process, then I begin to add paint and pigment prints or other media. When people can see themselves in portraiture, they can feel like they're included in society, in the conversation, in institutions. I think that's really important. I've visited the portrait gallery many times, and I know that there are all these important and famous Americans that appear in this museum, and I felt like Anthony's gesture was worthy of that. I think part of being an artist, it's putting yourself out there and accepting the rejection and going through rejection, and also not letting that rejection define you, but continuing to persist and continuing to try and just keep putting yourself out there. Winning first prize, I'm overwhelmed. It's such an honor. These artists, their work is so good. I'm very thankful to be amongst such beautiful and impactful works.
Portraiture for me is, one, it's exposing the world to my tribe. And as a child, I was constantly trying to just find images of ourselves. And so I began, doing that for the tribe. Eliza is wearing fancy dance outfit. So she has a shawl wrapped around her, and that yoke is something that's probably more contemporary, that's all beaded with the flowers. But then there's also some applique on the vest that she's wearing. And if you notice, there's a bear on her belly. If you look at those little finer details, you can kind of figure out even who the person is and who they come from. The viewers come into this gallery. What I'd like them to take away from these portraits are the resilience of my people, the beauty of my people. The majority of my work, I have them looking directly at the viewer because I want them to be on the same level. And that's why they're also life-size or slightly larger than life-size, because I want there to be an interaction between the viewer and the sitter, and to show that strength of that person. The portraits, the idea for those came from when I was a child, and my mother took us to go see a medicine man out in South Dakota. And we were all sitting along the walls of that room. And then they turned the lights off, and the women had started singing. Those women were singing for those spirits to come in. Then all of a sudden, these white orbs started floating around the room. And for me, those beads are representing our ancestors. And that's one reason why I chose to do just white, so that they kind of glow and glitter like the spirits that are watching over us. I feel that the Outwin has brought really America to this museum. The fact that everyone's being represented now, and I think that's what this prize has done, and it has opened it up. So it's just wonderful to see just all the different types of things, because we all come to things with different aesthetics too when we're photographing and bringing our own cultures, I think, to that. And you can see that in so many of the pieces that are here. Being in the Outwin exhibition is just very exciting for me to be here, be in DC, and be represented.
What makes a really great photograph, what makes a really great portrait, in any sort of medium, is that artwork is a window into these other forms of discussion that can take place. I am Hmong, and my family's from Laos. And sometimes I would make photographs during the Hmong New Year and during, any of the big celebrations. This specific image, I had been asked to think about what it means to be an American. But this man talked about what it meant to be given a second chance. He sat there and he talked to me about having to leave his village and, having to leave his parents and what it felt like for him to fight during the Vietnam War. And he was crying, and I gave him the only thing that was close to me, which was this napkin. And he would take this napkin, he would talk to me, and he would fold it, and then he would wipe his tears with it. And then I asked him if I could photograph him. And I just continued to snap and made a lot of photographs of him. I photographed him looking directly at me. I photographed him looking off. And, it was a decision for me to decide what photograph best described that moment for me and how I felt and how I think he felt. A part of me is thinking his story as it relates to the story of Hmong people. We helped the Americans fight in a war that was never ours to begin with. And as a result of that, we are here in America, which is really great. But also, we lost our homes. Thousands and thousands of people have died. Families have been displaced. I want people to see that grief in the photograph. I want that photograph to be a window or a door to be opened up and to be able to talk about these things. I think portraiture maybe is the only thing that can do that. We can look at a face, a body, and we can relate. And there's something about that I think is really strong in why I love portraiture. To be a prize winner for me, I'm really grateful, but also to be able to show at the Smithsonian in the National Portrait Gallery to thousands of people that are gonna come through this space. That for me is worth so much more than any prize money.